The story starts with a woman named Katsuragi Hayami, who lives happily with her husband. One day, everything changes when she discovers lipstick on his jacket. Hayami knows the lipstick isn't hers, and it could only belong to another woman. Apparently, she realizes that her husband has been unfaithful, but she's willing to forgive him since this is his first time betraying her. To her shock, though, her husband tells her he wants a divorce because he's fallen for someone else. Stunned and heartbroken, Hayami decides to leave their home. As if her day couldn't get worse, her boss calls to inform her that she's been fired from her job. Just when she's processing this, someone steals her wallet. Left with nothing, Hayami is forced to spend the night in a cardboard box in the city park. During this time, she hopes her husband will call and apologize, thinking maybe it's all a big misunderstanding. But the call never comes. The scene then showing a wealthy high school student named Kaderoka Issei, who enjoys tricking people into playing games with him. Usually, his pranks are directed at his classmates. One day, one of his friends tells him he spotted someone unusual at the park. Curious, Issei and his friends go to the park and find Hayami inside a cardboard box. Surprisingly, this isn't the first time they've met. Issei remembers Hayami because, in the past, she stood up to him when he was bullying a classmate. She soon challenged him to a game of rock, paper, scissors, and if he lost, he'd have to carry his friend's backpack as punishment. To his embarrassment, he lost, and Hayami hasn't let him forget it. She then calls him a coward without any sense of honor. This comment infuriates Issei, so he takes her sandals and throws them into a nearby fountain. Then, he mockingly offers to give her money to retrieve her sandals, but only if she kneels and apologizes for humiliating him in the past. Hayami's fierce response surprises Issei, and to his own surprise, he finds himself oddly amused by her stubborn spirit. Later that night, Issei returned to the park, carrying a new pair of sandals for Hayami. He even offered her a place to stay. At first, Hayami hesitated, feeling unsure about going with a stranger. But when Issei tempted her with the promise of tasty food, she agreed. Surprisingly, Issei brought her in a luxurious car. When they arrived at Issei's house, Hayami was given food, which she devoured eagerly. As she enjoyed her meal, Issei suddenly handed her a list of games. He wanted her to play one, promising her money once she completed it. However, each game on the list seemed silly and childish, clearly meant to embarrass her. Hayami couldn't believe he expected her to go along with this. Without hesitation, she refused and told him she'd leave once she finished eating. But Issei wasn't used to people saying no to him. He grabbed the food right out of her hands, insisting that she play a game. Hayami, however, was just as determined as he was. She tried to grab the food back, and soon the two of them were wrestling over a simple meal. During the scuffle, Hayami lost her balance on the stairs, and the food slipped out of her hands, landing on an incredibly expensive piece of calligraphy. Realizing the damage would make Hayami feel responsible, Issei pressured her again, telling her she had to play a game to pay him back for the ruined calligraphy, which he claimed was worth 3 million yen. Left with no other choice, Hayami finally agreed. The next day, Issei instructed Hayami to dress up because her new task was to embarrass a social media celebrity at a party. If she succeeded, he promised to reward her with 200,000 yen. That evening, they arrived at the event, and Hayami quickly spotted her target, a young woman named Megumi, who constantly tried to get close to Issei. At the same time, the sight of Hayami beside Issei seemed to annoy Megumi, who couldn't understand why he would bring a 27-year-old woman like Hayami to a party, especially when he was only 17. Determined to separate them, Megumi followed Hayami to the restroom, pretending to be friendly. Once they were alone, Megumi tried to intimidate her, revealing that Issei was the son of the owner of a prestigious 5-star inn. She insisted that Hayami didn't belong in his world and urged her to leave. After leaving the restroom, Issei pulled Hayami aside into a quiet hallway for a private talk. He had a bold idea for how she could embarrass Megumi by insulting her in front of everyone at the party. Issei promised to increase her reward if she was willing to do it. As the guests gathered, Issei announced that Hayami had something to say to Megumi. At first, Hayami felt unsure, but after taking a deep breath, she decided to go through with it. Her words immediately hit a nerve, and Megumi became so furious that she poured a glass of water over Hayami's head. Instead of being upset, Issei just laughed, enjoying the situation. He then turned to Megumi and added to the insults, calling her a failed model who only wanted his money. To top it off, he poured water over her head as well. Hayami, frustrated by Issei's arrogance and disrespect, suddenly shoved his head into the birthday cake. She was fed up with his behavior and scolded him for his lack of respect toward others. Megumi, seeing Issei's humiliation, couldn't help but laugh. She admitted openly that she was only interested in his money and never truly liked him, even saying that he wasn't as impressive as his older brother. Annoyed by Megumi's rudeness, Hayami lifted the cake and threw it in her face. Megumi for acting immature and comparing people. After putting both of them in their place, she grabbed Issei and walked him out of the party. As they reached the car, they ran into his older brother, Seigo, who surprisingly recognized Hayami and seemed to have fond memories of her. Back at the house, Hayami was startled to see Issei's grandmother, Itsuko, waiting for them. Trying to clear up any misunderstanding, Hayami introduced herself and explained that she had no unusual relationship with Issei. Itsuko, however, already knew about her through the family butler, Eiji, and even invited Hayami to work at their family inn. Itsuko also offered Hayami a place to stay, which would make it easier for her to keep an eye on Issei and his peculiar games. When Issei heard his grandmother's decision, he quickly protested. But Itsuko ignored his complaints, telling him that her decision was final and that he had no choice but to accept it. The next day, Hayami began her job at the inn. At the same time, Seigo, who manages the inn, sat in his office, looking at an old photo of her and recalling memories from high school. It turns out Hayami was his first love back then. Later, after finishing her work, Hayami was relaxing by the river when Issei returned home from school. Feeling cheerful, she invited him to spend some time with her. That night, Hayami had a dream about meeting her first love, remembering only his face but not his name. It was a warm, happy memory for her. Unfortunately, the dream turned into a nightmare when Issei unexpectedly appeared, disrupting the peaceful scene. The following day, Hayami returned to her duties at the inn, but she noticed that some of the other employees were giving her cold looks. She soon realized that they had heard a rumor that she was destined to become Seigo's future wife. Because of this, those who secretly admired Seigo resented her presence. Not everyone disliked Hayami, though. A few employees who weren't interested in Seigo treated her kindly. However, the majority who held a grudge found small ways to make her uncomfortable. Instead of confronting her directly, they assigned her to put things in a storeroom rumored to be haunted. Unexpectedly, Hayami didn't protest, believing the ghost stories to be silly. While she was in the storeroom, Hayami's husband called, but she chose not to answer, focusing on her work instead. Suddenly, she stumbled, dropping her phone. At the same time, a male employee named Korise entered. He explained he was worried about her being alone in the storeroom and came to check on her. After her shift, Korise took Hayami to see Itsuko to report the other employees' bullying due to the rumor. Unexpectedly, Itsuko suggested that if Seigo truly wanted to propose, Hayami should consider accepting him. Itsuko was eager for Seigo to settle down and expressed her approval if Hayami became his wife. Hearing this, Issei felt a surge of jealousy. He couldn't understand why Itsuko would suddenly suggest Hayami for Seigo when he was the one who had brought her to the family. To him, Hayami was his personal companion, even if he called her his toy. Meanwhile, Hayami stayed silent as they discussed her as if she were an object, realizing how little say she seemed to have in her own life. The next day, Hayami met a woman named Kikuno, who shared a close bond with Seigo. At that moment, Kikuno studied Hayami's face intensely, making Hayami feel uneasy. Apparently, she had every reason to be wary, as other employees whispered that Kikuno, a former geisha, held significant influence at the inn. Known as a master of rumors, it was said she could ruin an entire family with just a few words. After finishing work, Hayami returned home, only to be met by Eay, who demanded that she play one of his games. Exhausted, she firmly refused, sensing he was in a mood but feeling too drained to care. Her refusal sparked his anger, and he lashed out, accusing her of having so many flaws that her husband left her for another woman. Later, Itsuko assigned both Eay and Hayami to retrieve some scrolls from the inn's storeroom, saying it was part of their responsibility. Eay went to Hayami's room and dragged her along, despite her exhaustion. Nervous about the storeroom's eerie reputation, he insisted she go in alone. Inside, Hayami began searching for the scrolls, while Eay provided some guidance through his phone. As she searched, a stranger briefly entered, mistaking the storeroom for a restroom, then quickly left. Already feeling unwell, Hayami decided she'd come back tomorrow to finish retrieving the scrolls. She was ready to leave and rest, but when she tried the door, she realized it had been locked from the outside. Too tired to struggle, she simply lay down and decided to sleep in the storeroom. Growing concerned, Eay eventually came to check on her. While they looked for the scrolls together, Hayami began opening up about her struggles, but before she could finish, she drifted off to sleep from sheer exhaustion. Seeing her asleep, Eay gently lifted her and placed her on a sofa in the inn's lounge, before went to find a blanket to keep her warm. As he searched, an employee intercepted him, saying that Seigo had asked her to fetch the blanket. It was no secret that Seigo didn't approve of Eay roaming around the inn due to his troublesome reputation. Ignoring the employee's words, Eay was determined to stay by Hayami's side. As he returned, he saw Seigo carrying Hayami, who was burning with a fever. Realizing her condition, Seigo quickly instructed an employee to call a doctor, showing deep concern for her well-being. The next morning, Hayami woke up feeling a bit better, though she was still allowed to rest to recover fully. Itsuko even instructed Eay to bring her a meal in her room. When he brought the food, he asked if she remembered what happened the day before. Hayami said she did, but she mistakenly assumed it was Eay who had carried her, and she had no idea it was actually Seigo. For reasons he couldn't explain, Eay decided not to correct her, letting her continue to believe it was him. Later, when Hayami left her room and went downstairs, Eay noticed her cell phone ringing. It was her ex-husband calling. Acting on instinct, Eay answered the call and learned a surprising detail that Hayami and her husband weren't officially divorced yet, though her husband intended to change that soon. He informed Eay that he wanted to meet Hayami in a few days so she could sign the divorce papers. The next day, Eay went to Hayami's room, entering without knocking, as usual. He handed her the phone and told her husband wanted to meet in 3 days to finalize the divorce. Hearing this, Hayami's expression fell. She had secretly hoped they might reconcile, but it became clear her husband didn't feel the same. At that moment, Eay picked up on her sadness and felt a twinge of frustration. In his own way, Eay urged her to play a game with him, this time suggesting she demand compensation from her husband as part of the divorce. To do this, they needed proof of his affair. Determined, they spent the day following Hayami's husband. They trailed him from his office to a cafe and then back to his apartment, but they found no evidence. When they returned home late that night, Itsuko was waiting for them. Unexplained, Hayami decided to open up about her past to Itsuko. She revealed that she once lived as a neighbor to the Kataoka family. When she was in junior high, her mother passed away, and her father fell into deep despair, spending his days in alcohol, neglecting Hayami completely. By the time she graduated high school, she chose to live independently and worked at a cafe, where she eventually met her husband, Masahiro. Masahiro had fallen for her the moment they met, constantly expressing his feelings, though she initially rejected him every time. Then months later, her father passed away too. Even though they weren't close, his death hit her hard, as he was her last family member, and she suddenly felt utterly alone. During this time, Masahiro became her only support, helping her through her grief. He even proposed, offering her the chance to rebuild a family. For a while, she believed she could have a happy life with him. But as time went on, her dreams faded, and he ultimately betrayed her trust. After listening to Hayami's story, Itsuko's face softened with sadness. Issei, however, had a different reaction. He was frustrated, urging her to confront Masahiro directly when they met. Although he felt bad for her, Issei was even more annoyed that she had been so forgiving toward her unfaithful husband. The following day, Hayami continued working as usual, but her senior co-workers continued their bullying. This time, her patience was wearing thin. Frustrated, she went to see Kaorise, asking if he could help stop the rumors. Kaorise, however, explained that gossiping was a habit among the employees. His only advice was for Hayami to speak with the head of staff, who had gone through a similar experience, having also been abandoned and betrayed by her ex-husband. As evening fell, Hayami decided to follow Masahiro again, this time on her own, without involving Issei. She quietly trailed him from his office to his apartment, but found no signs of another woman. Then, she saw him making a call outside the apartment, which gave her a sinking feeling. Trusting her instincts, she began recording. A few minutes later, a woman warmly greeted him at the door, confirming her suspicions. When night came, Hayami hadn't yet returned, worrying both Itsuko and Issei. Concerned, Issei went out to search for her and finally found her sitting alone. As soon as she saw him, she showed him the video, revealing the proof of Masahiro's affair. According to their plan, she would use this evidence to demand compensation. But Issei noticed the sadness hidden beneath her smile, realizing how deeply this had hurt her. The next day, Hayami finally met with Masahiro. He asked her to sign the divorce papers quickly, while she demanded compensation of 3 million yen, explaining she would use it to pay off her debt to Issei. Masahiro was shocked to learn of her debt, and eventually agreed, though he could only give her 1 million yen up front, promising to pay the rest in installments. Unbeknownst to Hayami, Issei had followed her to Masahiro's apartment and waited outside. Though he didn't know the details of their conversation, he could tell by her expression that things hadn't gone well. His suspicions were confirmed when she handed him only 1 million yen, explaining that Masahiro had agreed to pay the rest later. Without hesitation, Issei stormed into Masahiro's apartment, demanding that he pay the full amount immediately, not in installments. But Hayami's surprise quickly stopped him. She didn't want to pressure Masahiro into paying more than he could afford. Instead, she asked Masahiro to tell her the truth about the woman he was seeing. Masahiro tried to explain himself, saying the other woman needed his support and protection and couldn't manage without him. Before he could say more, Issei punched him, telling him to keep quiet, unwilling to let him say anything that would hurt Hayami further. Despite everything, Hayami chose not to accept any compensation from Masahiro and tore up their signed agreement. She firmly told him that she no longer wanted anything to do with him. As they left the apartment, Hayami apologized to Issei for not completing the game as planned, then broke down in tears. She had been holding back her emotions since their separation, but now the tears flowed freely. Not wanting her to feel embarrassed, Issei gently turned her to face the river so others wouldn't see her crying. Meanwhile, Masahiro called his girlfriend to inform her that the divorce papers were signed, but to his surprise, she coldly told him she no longer needed him and ended the call abruptly. Adding to his shock, she blocked his number immediately afterward. The scene then shifts to reveal that the woman is actually Kikuno, who sits with a photograph of Hayami and Seigo by the river in high school. She gazes at the picture with a knowing smile, hinting that she is aware of Hayami and Seigo's past. But her reasons for wanting to ruin Hayami's marriage remain unclear. The next day, Hayami returned to work feeling calmer. As she was sweeping the garden, Seigo approached her and introduced himself. When Hayami saw his face, memories of her first love stirred within her. Their brief reunion was noticed by other employees, who grew even more envious of Hayami's closeness with Seigo. Later, as she was about to go home, Hayami encountered Kikuno, who asked to exchange contact information, promising that Hayami could reach out to her anytime for help. Additionally, Kikuno assured her she would always be there if needed. After exchanging contacts, Hayami went to the shoe rack, only to find her shoes missing. The head employee quickly guessed that her co-workers were behind this prank, feeling they had crossed a line. She wanted to confront everyone to find the culprit, but Hayami gently requested she let it go, fearing it would only worsen the tension. With her work sandals still on, Hayami headed home, accompanied by Kaorise. On the way, they ran into Eay, who immediately noticed her missing shoes after Kaorise explained the situation. Moments later, Seigo arrived, having also heard what happened, and offered to buy her a new pair of shoes. When Seigo offered to buy her new shoes, Hayami politely declined, not wanting to inconvenience him. Eay agreed, telling Seigo she didn't need new shoes. He then took Hayami home with him, leaving Seigo surprised and speechless at how close they seemed to be. Back at home, Hayami opened up to Eay, explaining that she had actually met his brother 10 years ago. When Eay asked if Seigo had been her first love, she nodded, sparking a hint of jealousy in him. Still, he listened closely as she recalled their first meeting. At that time, she had met Seigo by chance one day by the river, and after that, they met often in the same spot. Even though they grew close over 2 months, they never actually exchanged names. As Hayami shared this story, Eay suddenly sensed they were being eavesdropped on. Sure enough, Itsuko and Eiji were quietly listening behind the door, which annoyed him. Frustrated, he decided he didn't want to hear any more of Hayami's past with his brother and abruptly left the room. Meanwhile, Seigo, curious about Hayami, went to ask Kikuno about her. Unexpectedly, Kikuno's response caught him off guard. She hinted that he should feel lucky to reconnect with his first love after so many years. Suspicious, Seigo wondered if Kikuno had something to do with Hayami's difficult situation. The next day at the inn, Hayami went to the staff office to ask her senior a work-related question. However, instead of helping, her senior seemed irritated and instructed Hayami to stay in the office in case a guest called. Soon after, the phone rang. It was from a regular guest known for being quite demanding. The guest sounded displeased to have her call answered by Hayami, a new employee. Still, Hayami remained calm and carefully noted down the guest's booking details. When her senior returned, Hayami informed her about the guest call, but her senior barely acknowledged her and simply told her to leave the note on the desk. The following day, just as Hayami was about to head to work, Itsuko informed her of an issue at the inn. It turned out that the booking note Hayami had written was missing, which led to the employees being unprepared for the demanding guest's arrival. Fortunately, Itsuko quickly calmed the staff down, advising them to do their best to prepare for the guest's needs. Not long after, the guest named Sionji finally arrived. As the owner of a successful entertainment company, she was always surrounded by a group of young men. Apparently, she was a huge fan of Seigo and often stayed at the inn to see him. Unfortunately, Seigo had left for a business trip the day before her arrival. When Sionji realized Seigo wasn't there to greet her, she wasn't pleased. Seeing this, Itsuko quickly soothed her, explaining that she had already called Seigo to return as soon as possible. For now, Sanji would be entertained by the male employees, though, despite their efforts, none could seem to satisfy her. Outside the banquet hall, Kaorise explained to Hayami that Sionji was notoriously hard to please and only allowed male employees in her room, with the exception of Kikuno, due to her status as a geisha. However, Kikuno was busy entertaining other guests. Meanwhile, the female employees tried to get the male staff to deliver food to Sionji's room, as they weren't permitted to enter. The male employees, however, were exhausted and frustrated with her demands, refusing to do it. Just then, to everyone's surprise, Hayami volunteered to deliver the food herself. Seonji was visibly annoyed to see a female employee enter her room. Hayami, however, had her reasons. She wanted to apologize directly for answering Seonji's call the day before, hoping to prevent any blame from falling on her coworkers. But this only irritated her further. She felt Hayami was suggesting she was looking to place blame. Hoping to smooth things over, Hayami said she would do anything Seonji wanted, even resign if that would make her happy. This gave Seonji an idea for entertainment. With a sly smile, she demanded that Hayami dance for her without any clothes. Hayami reluctantly agreed, ready to follow through, but just as she began, Eay burst into the room, dressed in a kimono and ready to entertain Seonji. It was revealed that Itsuko had called him from school specifically to take Seigo's place. The sight of Eay instantly lifted Seonji's mood, and she quickly lost interest in her plan for Hayami. Instead, she instructed Hayami to prepare a drink for Eay, now completely absorbed in his arrival. Soon after, while Hayami was outside the room, she received a message from Eay challenging her to a new game. Her task was simple. She just had to hug and then slap Seonji. If she succeeded, he promised her 2 million yen. What Hayami didn't know was that Eay's real motive was to anger Seonji and damage the inn's reputation. He felt resentful that Itsuko had pressured him to keep Seonji entertained. The scene then shifts to Seonji, who is enjoying an engaging conversation with Eay. Suddenly, she mentions his mother, triggering dark memories from his past. This remark causes Eay to lose control, angrily berating Seonji for bringing up painful memories and even attempting to lash out at her. Hayami, witnessing the scene, rushed in and, instead of slapping Seonji, slapped Eay across the face to stop him. At that moment, Kikuno stepped in to assist Seonji, using his charm to help calm her down. Soon after, Kikuno arrived, having finished entertaining other guests, and joined Kikuno in calming Seonji. Just when things seemed to settle, Seonji unexpectedly asked Hayami to clean up and stay to drink with her. A little while later, everyone gathered to enjoy Kikuno's graceful dance, as if the earlier commotion hadn't happened. It was revealed that Seonji seemed impressed by Hayami's courage, noting that she reminded her of Eay's late mother. Before leaving, Seonji met Seigo, who apologized for not being there to greet her. Surprisingly, she reassured him, saying she had been well entertained despite his absence. Seigo then watched her depart with a satisfied smile and thanked the staff for their efforts. At the same time, Kikuno quietly informed him that it was all thanks to Hayami's bravery. The scene shifts to Kikuno visiting Seigo in his room. She shyly requested a reward for helping to calm Seonji. However, Seigo simply thanked her, which made her suspect that he was distancing himself because of Hayami. Testing him, she challenged his cool demeanor, and Seigo responded by giving her the reward she wanted, a kiss. Meanwhile, Hayami took Eay on a walk to thank him for helping during Seonji's visit. But Eay, distracted, seemed disinterested in her gratitude. His mind was racing with questions, especially about why Hayami had gotten so involved in handling Seonji. She was a new employee and wasn't obligated to deal with such demanding guests. This led Eay to suspect that Hayami's actions were for Seigo's sake rather than for the inn. He couldn't keep his curiosity to himself any longer, so he decided to ask her directly. Hayami responded firmly, saying she had no relationship with Seigo, certainly not a romantic one. However, her answer didn't seem to convince Eay. He grabbed her shoulder, asking her to repeat it while looking directly into his eyes. His intense behavior made her uncomfortable, so instead of replying, she punched him in the stomach, causing him to double over in pain. The next day, Eay seemed slightly different. His attitude toward Hayami had softened, and he only asked her to play simple games, like buying a drink from a vending machine a kilometer away. Hayami found this unusual and wondered why he was acting so differently. but when she asked him about it, he brushed it off and walked away awkwardly. Later, Hayami shared Issei's sudden change with Kaorise and Kikuno after finishing work. Kaorise speculated that Issei might be jealous, recalling how he saw her with Seigo when she lost her shoes. Kikuno agreed with him and gently warned Hayami against getting involved with a high schooler like Issei, adding that Hayami would eventually find her true soulmate, but it wouldn't be Issei. By coincidence, Hayami ran into Seigo as she was leaving. He handed her the shoes she had lost, explaining that they mysteriously showed up outside his office door. But his reason for stopping her wasn't just about the shoes. He also invited her to have dinner with him. Hayami accepted without hesitation. A little while later, back at home, Issei saw Hayami preparing to leave, and his suspicions grew. She was trying on a dress, looking like she was headed for a date. When he asked if she was meeting someone, she only said she was seeing a friend, which didn't satisfy him. He strongly suspected she was going to meet Seigo. Determined to find out, Issei decided to follow her. Keeping his distance, he trailed Hayami until Kaorise caught him in the act. Kaorise quickly threatened to tell her unless Issei let him join in on the spying. Reluctantly, Issei agreed. He even brought equipment that allowed him to listen in on Hayami and Seigo's conversation from afar. However, he didn't expect their conversation to focus on memories from their past. In the past, Seigo had once saved Hayami when her drunken father nearly became violent toward her. Seigo had grabbed her hand and led her away to the riverbank, where he opened up about his feelings. At that moment, Seigo told her that he was worried for her safety and invited her to live with him, knowing that staying with her father would only put her at risk. Not only that, Seigo also admitted he couldn't yet provide a stable life, but promised he would become a man she could depend on once he took over the family inn. At that moment, the only thing he could offer her was his own shoes, as she had left home without wearing any. However, Hayami had turned down Seigo's heartfelt offer, explaining that she couldn't leave her father behind, as he was the only family she had left. She walked away, tears in her eyes, and from that day on, they never saw each other again. Now, sitting across from Seigo, Hayami apologized for rejecting his kindness back then. Seigo, understanding her situation, assured her he had never resented her decision. Instead, he was curious if she felt anything for his younger brother, Issei. Hayami paused, but then smiled, reassuring Seigo that she had no romantic feelings for Issei. After all, Issei saw her as nothing more than an older woman. Listening from afar, Issei's face fell when he heard Hayami say this. Seigo, on the other hand, felt relieved, sensing he might still have a chance with her. Unable to watch any further, Issei stood up, marched over to them, and interrupted their conversation with a bold demand. He told Hayami to play a new game. This time, he wanted her to embarrass Seigo in front of everyone in the restaurant. Hayami immediately refused, and Seigo firmly backed her up, asking Issei to leave them alone. After this tense moment, Hayami grew more curious about why Issei behaved this way, showing such resentment towards Seigo and the inn he managed. Seigo, noticing her curiosity, began to explain. According to him, the source of Issei's bitterness was their late mother. Years ago, their mother had been a regular employee at the inn until she married their father, the inn's manager. Her marriage promoted her to the role of the inn's big mistress, which caused jealousy among the female staff. This envy made her a target of bullying, as many of the employees resented her position. One day, Issei's mother fell gravely ill, and the doctor told the family that she didn't have much time left. Not wanting her family to watch her health decline daily, she chose to leave home when Issei was only 7. As a result, Issei grew up connecting her illness and departure to the inn. He believed that the harsh work environment and bullying she endured there were responsible for her suffering. From that moment, his resentment toward the inn took root and only intensified, especially when Seigo decided to take over the inn that he blamed for his mother's absence. After sharing this story, Seigo walked Hayami home. On his way back, he received a call from Kikuno, who somehow knew that he had just been out with Hayami. She surprised him by offering her support, saying she would be happy for him to pursue Hayami if it brought him joy. This response made Seigo suspicious. Kikuno seemed to know everything, almost as if she had been secretly watching them. Meanwhile, Hayami planned to treat Eay to a meal the next day, using her first paycheck from working at the inn. Eay, still upset over her dinner with Seigo, responded coldly. Instead of accepting her offer, he announced a final game. She had to leave the house. Hayami had sensed this moment would come sooner or later. Respecting his wishes, she packed her belongings and prepared to leave, despite Eay and Itsuko's efforts to change her mind. She was determined to move forward, so she decided to stay at the inn instead. Little did she know, Kikuno had a new plan in mind for her, one that involved her ex-husband, Masahiro. As Hayami left, Eay's expression showed traces of regret, something Itsuko quickly noticed. She urged him to go after Hayami and convince her to return, but his pride wouldn't allow it. Frustrated, he snapped at Eay and even knocked over the drink he had brought for him. Disappointed by his stubbornness, Itsuko slapped him and ordered him to leave the house. Meanwhile, Masahiro appeared at the inn to see Hayami, unexpectedly apologizing for his actions. He confessed that part of their separation stemmed from her silence. He often felt useless as a husband because she never openly shared her thoughts with him. He suggested that if they had communicated better, maybe they wouldn't have ended up like this. Hearing Masahiro's words, Hayami realized that he was right about her. She often kept her feelings hidden, and maybe that's why Eay had been so frustrated with her recently. She should have been open with him, telling him how thankful she was for everything he'd done for her since she left his house. In truth, Eay had become a very important person in her life. With this newfound understanding, Hayami decided to end things with Masahiro once and for all, asking him to stay out of her life. She turned to leave and search for Eay, but Masahiro tried to stop her, insisting they could still be friends despite the divorce. He wanted her to stay and continue their conversation, refusing to let her go. Just then, Seigo arrived, telling Hayami to go find Eay while he dealt with Masahiro. On her way, Hayami received a call from Eay, who informed her that Eay had left the house without his wallet. Eay was worried and asked Hayami to help find him, explaining that Itsuko had forbidden him from going after Eay herself, believing he needed to learn a lesson about his spoiled behavior. Meanwhile, Eay was at a city park where he ran into his classmates. Concerned about his recent behavior, they reached out to him, but he coldly brushed them off, accusing them of only being his friends because of his money. His harsh words angered them, and one of his friends hit him. Thankfully, Hayami arrived just in time to stop the fight. She tried to reassure Eay, telling him that his friends genuinely cared for him and didn't deserve his anger. But Eay wouldn't listen and stormed off, forcing Hayami to chase after him. As they walked, Hayami continued to try to calm him down, but his anger remained. He accused her of being just like his friends, only interested in his family's wealth. He insisted that she only tolerated his games for the money, implying that she saw him as nothing but worthless. He even claimed his mother had said the same, that she didn't need him before she left. Hayami listened quietly, allowing him to vent before softly replying that she wasn't after his money. She wanted to be with him simply because she felt happy around him. She acknowledged his flaws, but she also saw his kindness, the side of him that helped her when she needed it. In the end, she genuinely wanted to make things right between them. Hayami's sincerity touched Eay, and he responded by hugging her warmly. This time, Hayami didn't resist. She hugged him back. When they returned home, Eay immediately apologized to Eay and Itsuko for his behavior earlier, grateful for the support they had shown him. Meanwhile, Kikuno paid a visit to Masahiro at his apartment. It became clear that his recent encounter with Hayami had been part of her plan, but she was dissatisfied with how things had turned out. She then coldly instructed Masahiro to stay away from Hayami and the inn, ignoring his pleas for her not to abandon him. With Masahiro no longer useful to her, Kikuno swiftly moved to her next scheme. She sent a video clip of Hayami and Eay hugging to Seigo. Upon watching it, Seigo felt a surge of frustration and annoyance. The following day, Eay made his way to the tea room at the inn, planning to wait for Hayami to finish her shift. There, he found Kaorise, who managed the tea room, and started a casual chat. While waiting, Eay saw Seigo inviting Hayami to dinner, sparking a realization. Understanding he couldn't compete with Seigo if he continued acting immaturely, Eay asked Kaorise for guidance on how to become more mature. Encouraged by Kaorise's advice, Eay returned home and asked his grandmother for permission to work part-time at the inn during summer vacation. Specifically wanted to learn from Kaorise at the tea house. When summer break began, Eay was introduced as a new part-time worker, much to Hayami's shock. At the same time, Seigo disapproved of Eay working at the inn and voiced his concerns to Itsuko. However, Itsuko reassured him, urging him to support Eay's growth and give him a chance to prove himself. Just like Seigo, Eay quickly became the center of attention among the female employees, who often lingered, especially as Hayami seemed to avoid him, even though his main reason for working there was to be closer to her. One day, Seigo informed Hayami that some employees at the inn had expressed negative views about her. The inn maintained an opinion box where employees could anonymously share their thoughts about colleagues in the workplace. Recently, the box had been filled with critical comments about Hayami. Because of this, Seigo suggested that Hayami consider working elsewhere to avoid further bullying. He offered to introduce her to contacts who managed other inns and assured her that he only wanted to help, but the final decision was hers to make. Hayami began to seriously consider Seigo's advice. While the idea of changing jobs seemed appealing as a way to escape the bullying, she still felt uncertain. She confided in her close friend Mihiro, sharing her worries and thoughts about possibly moving on. Mihiro shared Hayami's thoughts about changing jobs with Kaorise, who then informed Eay. Seeing a chance to get closer to Hayami, Eay went straight to her and offered to help uncover who had been writing the hurtful comments in the opinion box. He promised to identify the culprits but emphasized that she would need to confront them herself. It didn't take long for Eay to pinpoint two possible suspects, Chiba and Matsu, two senior employees at the inn. However, when Hayami confronted them, she found out they weren't responsible for the letters. Although both admitted they disliked her, especially Chiba, who was jealous of her connection with Seigo, they insisted they hadn't written anything in the opinion box. Hayami apologized for suspecting them, and while Chiba still disliked her, Hayami managed to convince her to set aside their differences so they could work together peacefully. In a small gesture of support, Chiba even accompanied Hayami to Seigo, urging him not to push Hayami to quit. With this reassurance, Hayami decided to stay at the inn. Later that evening, Seigo happened to meet Hayami on her way home. Their conversation began casually, and Seigo confessed that he was still learning as an inn manager and had acted emotionally by advising her to change jobs. Then, without warning, he hugged her, expressing how happy he was to have her working at his family's inn. And Seigo realized this. He apologized for hugging her and quietly walked away. The next day, the inn held a welcome party for Eay as a new employee. During a break, Eay went to the restroom, where Kikuno approached him, showing him an old photo of Seigo and Hayami from 10 years ago by the river. She hinted that he should give up on Hayami, hoping the image of their past connection would dissuade him. But Eay wasn't shaken. He remained determined to pursue Hayami regardless of her history with Seigo. Their tense conversation was cut short when Seigo called Eay back to the party room. After Eay left, Seigo pulled Kikuno aside into his study, pressing her to reveal her intentions once and for all. Tired of her vague manipulations, he demanded a clear answer. Kikuno responded cryptically, claiming she was merely trying to bring him and Hayami together and insisting he had no right to question her methods. If he did, she warned, she would expose their past relationship to Hayami. Meanwhile, as soon as Eay returned to the party room, he suddenly passed out. Hayami, not noticing him right away, accidentally spilled beer on his face, causing him to jolt awake briefly before collapsing into Kaorise's arms. Eay couldn't handle alcohol at all. Just a few drops were enough to knock him out for hours. Sure enough, he didn't wake up until the following afternoon, long after the party had ended. Out of concern, Hayami stayed with him while he was unconscious. When Eay finally woke up, Hayami handed him a flyer she had found. It was for a fireworks festival, and he had planned to invite her. As he nervously asked her to go with him, Hayami stayed silent, looking thoughtfully at the flyer. Misinterpreting her silence, Eay thought she might not be interested. But then, to his delight, she agreed, even turning down Seigo's invitation to go with him to the festival. On the day of the festival, Hayami and Eay arrived early to enjoy the festivities. They explored the food stands, games, and entertainment booths. Though they felt a bit awkward at first, they soon relaxed and had a great time together. At one point, Eay even gathered the courage to compliment her appearance, which brought a smile to her face. While Hayami and Eay enjoyed the festival, the employees, including Chiba and Matsu, were working overtime. During her shift, Chiba noticed Matsu acting strangely in the hallway, looking around as though she didn't want anyone to see her. Chiba's suspicion grew, and she quietly followed Matsu into the employees' locker room. To her shock, she saw Matsu attempting to pour a strange liquid on Hayami's belongings. Chiba immediately stopped her, demanding an explanation. Under pressure, Matsu admitted to causing the recent troubles at the inn, including tampering with the opinion box and losing Sionji's reservation memo. But she quickly added that she wasn't acting on her own. She was following someone else's orders. Though Matsu didn't reveal the name right away, it was clear that the person behind everything was none other than Kikuno. Meanwhile, Kikuno was also at the festival. Spotting Hayami alone when Eay went to the restroom, she approached her, pretending to want a friendly chat about Seigo. But her real intent was to steal Hayami's cell phone, aiming to separate her from Eay. With Hayami's phone secretly in her possession, Kikuno then found Eay and asked him to help her, pretending she had sprained her ankle. Leading him to a secluded corner, she tried to kiss him. Fortunately, Eay resisted, knowing that while he was attracted to older women, Kikuno was not the one he wanted to kiss. Meanwhile, Hayami, growing tired of waiting for Eay, decided to go look for him. However, instead of finding him, she ran into Seigo, who was also at the festival despite his staff working overtime back at the inn. They chatted briefly, and then Hayami resumed her search for Eay. But as she moved through the dense crowd, she couldn't spot him anywhere. Instead, she encountered Kikuno, who offered to lead her to where Eay was. After following Kikuno for a while, they reached a wooded area near the festival site. It was getting dark, and the crowd noise had faded away, leaving them in eerie silence. Suddenly, Kikuno shoved Hayami off a small cliff. Hayami fell hard, spraining her ankle, which made it painful and difficult for her to stand or walk back to the festival. Unbothered, Kikuno returned to the festival, where she casually informed Seigo that Hayami had slipped and fallen off a cliff. Meanwhile, Eay was still searching for Hayami when he crossed paths with Kaorise. Worried, he told Kaorise that he had been separated from Hayami and couldn't find her anywhere. Because of this, they decided to split up. Eay would continue searching while Kaorise reported Hayami's disappearance to the festival security. When Kaorise arrived at the security post, he spotted Kikuno laughing and chatting with some others. He informed her about Hayami's disappearance, and she casually pulled out Hayami's cell phone, claiming she had found it and placed it in the lost and found box. Back in the crowd, Eay finally got a lead when a co-worker mentioned seeing Hayami and Kikuno walking toward the forest. Thanking her, he immediately dashed toward the woods. However, Seigo found Hayami first. She painfully explained that Kikuno had pushed her off the cliff, but she didn't dwell on it. All she wanted was to return to the festival to keep her promise to watch the fireworks with Eay. Determined, she hobbled along with a stick for support, but Seigo, seeing her struggle, offered to carry her to a bench on the nearby hill. Once they reached the bench, they sat together, and as the fireworks began, they watched the bright colors light up the night sky. Caught up in the romantic atmosphere, Seigo leaned in, hoping to kiss her. Gently, Hayami stopped him, finally realizing and admitting to herself that her heart now belonged to Issei. Seigo listened and, though disappointed, accepted her feelings. After the fireworks festival, Seigo carefully carried Hayami down the hill to rejoin Kaorise and the others. Kikuno was there too, smiling sweetly as she apologized to Hayami. However, her act couldn't fool Kaorise anymore. How could she be laughing and drinking at the security post when she knew that Hayami was in danger? When Kaorise confronted her, Kikuno only smiled, brushing it off as a misunderstanding. As Kikuno walked away, Seigo quickly followed her, demanding she stop whatever scheme she was planning and forbidding her from returning to the inn. Shortly afterward, Issei arrived and, noticing Hayami's injured leg, lifted her in his arms to carry her home right in front of Seigo. Once they got home, Issei carefully tended to Hayami's sprained ankle. As he wrapped her injury, he asked her directly about her feelings for Seigo. In response, Hayami replied that Seigo was a part of her past, reassuring Issei. Taking her answer as a sign, he gently leaned in and kissed her, asking her to leave. Issei confessed that he was certain of his love for her, brushing aside her concerns about their 10-year age gap or her comments about seeing him as a little brother. His feelings were strong and unwavering, and he wanted her to feel the same. After his confession, a new awkwardness filled the room as they both tried to process what had just happened. The sudden arrival of Kikuno broke the tension. She claimed to be there to apologize to Hayami for what happened the night before and returned her cell phone, even saying Hayami could use it to call the police if she felt Kikuno deserved it. After a moment of thought, Hayami decided to forgive her, assuming Kikuno's actions stemmed from jealousy over her closeness with Seigo. However, her doubts returned when Kikuno's phone rang and Masahiro's name appeared on the screen. Realization dawned on her that Kikuno was her ex-husband's mistress. At this point, Kikuno revealed her true intentions. She admitted she had seduced Masahiro and led him to betray Hayami, all to clear a path to Seigo. She insisted that Seigo was the right man for Hayami, not a high schooler like Issei or a failure like Masahiro. Confident in her plan, she even threatened to harm the people Hayami cared about if she opposed her. Issei, enraged, immediately ordered Kikuno to leave, but her threats had already unsettled Hayami. Kikuno's words echoed in her mind. Could she truly be with someone 10 years younger, or was it wise to ignore these doubts? Still, Hayami's curiosity burned. She needed to understand why Kikuno was so fixated on pairing her with Seigo and why she had gone to such extreme lengths. Determined to get answers, Hayami sought out Seigo, demanding he tell her everything he knew about Kikuno. It turned out that Kikuno and Seigo had been classmates in high school. She had always admired him from afar, even observing him when he was with Hayami. Apparently, she was also by the river on the day Hayami left Seigo, urging him to go after her, but he refused, telling Kikuno to stay out of his personal matters. Hearing Seigo's story made Hayami angry. If Seigo had known all along who Kikuno was and noticed her obsession, why hadn't he stopped her sooner? But there was no changing the past. Now, she only hoped he would take Kikuno's threats seriously and no longer allow her to meddle in their lives. Later that night at home, Hayami asked Issei to promise he wouldn't confront Kikuno on his own. She explained that Kikuno was dangerous, and she couldn't bear the thought of Issei getting hurt. Issei then asked what she planned to do next. However, she hesitated, torn between wanting to protect him and feeling he might be better off without her. Part of her wanted to leave so he could find someone more suitable, but she held back, knowing it would only lead to an argument. To her surprise, Issei seemed to read her thoughts, growing frustrated as he pointed out that leaving wouldn't solve anything. He then asked her directly if she truly saw him only as a little brother, or if she would regret it if they parted ways. To settle his doubts, Issei asked for permission to hug her, wanting to see her reaction. And as he suspected, her expression showed something more than sibling affection. It was the look of someone happy to be held by the person they loved. Even so, Issei told her not to voice her feelings just yet, giving her time to process everything. The next day, Hayami met with Seigo and gently told him she couldn't return his love. When he asked if her heart belonged to Eay, she hesitated before confirming. Seigo, though clearly saddened, accepted her decision gracefully, saying he trusted her to make his younger brother happy. That evening, determined to protect Hayami, Eay took it upon himself to confront Kikuno. He asked her to stop causing harm, especially to Hayami, and warned that he wouldn't hesitate to use force if necessary. Yet Kikuno remained eerily calm, unfazed by his threats. The reason for her confidence soon became clear, that she had a stun gun hidden in her bag, which she used to immobilize him, leaving him powerless. Meanwhile, at home, Hayami was growing increasingly anxious. Hours had passed, and Eay still hadn't returned or sent any message. Unable to shake the worry, she decided to go out and search for him. She looked everywhere she thought he might be, but he was nowhere to be found. When she returned, Hayami shared her concerns about Eay's disappearance with Itsuko and Eay, who had just returned from a business trip. In the middle of her explanation, Eay received a text from Eay's phone saying he would be staying at a friend's house. But what they didn't know was that Kikuno had sent the message after locking Eay in an old, abandoned shack. Despite the text, Hayami couldn't shake her worry. Her fears were confirmed when she received a photo from Kikuno showing Eay tied up and held captive. Shortly after, Kikuno called Hayami, demanding that she start a romantic relationship with Seigo and even send her a photo of them hugging. Although the request sounded absurd, Kikuno was deadly serious, threatening to kill Eay if Hayami didn't comply. After hanging up, Kikuno turned to Eay and revealed her reasons for going to such extreme lengths. Her grudge went back 10 years when Hayami had rejected Seigo, leaving him heartbroken. What enraged Kikuno even more was that Hayami eventually found happiness with Masahiro, determined to ruin Hayami's life and happiness. Kikuno's plan was to let her be with Seigo for a while before revealing her past connection with him, planning to ultimately break her spirit before taking Seigo for herself. On the other hand, Hayami told Seigo everything she had learned from Kikuno. However, without knowing where Kikuno was holding Eay, there was little they could do to rescue him. Just then, Seigo had an idea, inspired by a cup of coffee Kaorise had just brought him. He quickly shared his plan with Kaorise, asking him to send a casual message to Eay's phone, asking where he kept the coffee, as if Kaorise didn't know he was in trouble. In the shack, Kikuno showed Eay the message from Kaorise and instructed him to reply to keep up appearances. At first, Eay was confused. He wasn't responsible for handling the coffee. But after a moment, he realized the question was a hidden code he and Seigo had used before, a subtle way to communicate in emergencies. Realizing this, Eay asked Kikuno to reply to Kaorise's message with, "The coffee is next to a bug cage that a child left behind during the fireworks display." This phrase was a secret code to tell Seigo his location, but Kikuno didn't catch the meaning. Believing the message was literal, she sent it without suspicion. As soon as Hayami and the others received Eay's response, they understood the hint. Without wasting any time, Hayami rushed to the shack to rescue him. Meanwhile, Seigo reached out to Kikuno, asking her to return to work at the inn. He explained that some special guests had specifically requested her appearance, even adding that guest numbers had dropped since her dismissal. Convincing her that she was needed, Seigo managed to lure Kikuno back to the inn, leaving Eay alone in the shack. With Kikuno gone, Hayami arrived at the shack and found Eay. She looked visibly upset, yet relieved to see him safe. More than anything, she was grateful that he hadn't been harmed. Back at the inn, Kikuno returned only to find Seigo waiting, seemingly pleading with her to release Eay. Realizing that Seigo knew the full story, Kikuno brazenly told him to bring Hayami into his office so they could formally start a relationship. Only after that would she let Eay go free. What Kikuno didn't realize was that Seigo had orchestrated this entire moment. He had instructed Kaorise to record her from behind a closed door, capturing her admission of the kidnapping as evidence. Confronting her with the recording, Seigo demanded that she turn herself in and prepared to take her to the police. However, Kikuno managed to break free and ran to the tea house, grabbing a knife and threatening to do the unthinkable. Just then, Hayami and Eay arrived at the inn. Seeing Kikuno with a knife, Hayami quickly acted. She gave Kikuno a firm headbutt, knocking her off balance, and then spoke to her with compassion, encouraging her to confront her mistakes instead of escaping through drastic measures. In the days following the incident, life at the inn gradually returned to normal. But Eay was especially focused, working harder than anyone else. He had a plan to save up his salary and buy Hayami a new pair of shoes, which he intended to surprise her with on their next date. The next day, when Eay excitedly asked Hayami out on a date, she gently told him that she'd soon be moving out of his family's house. She felt it was wrong to continue living there when she could stand on her own. A few days passed, and Eay was still lost in thought, unsure how he would give Hayami the gift he'd saved for her, and most importantly, how he could stop her from leaving. Just then, Seigo came by with Eay's first paycheck and urged him to chase after Hayami, who had just left the house with Eay driving her. Without a second thought, Eay sprinted down the road, chasing the car. Eay, watching his master's son running with such determination, decided to pull over, allowing Hayami to face Eay directly. Out of breath but unwavering, Eay confronted her, and Hayami finally confessed that she had thought of accepting his feelings, but fear had held her back. Hayami admitted that she was afraid their age difference would harm Eay's future. She believed he deserved a younger partner, someone who would fit better with his life. On top of that, her past heartbreak still lingered, leaving her worried about trust and the potential for failure. Yet, despite her doubts, Hayami had already fallen in love with him. She was torn between her feelings for Eay and her fear of ruining everything. In response, Eay gently pulled her into a warm embrace, reassuring her that her fears didn't matter to him. He reminded her he had already told her he didn't care about their age gap. He only wanted to be with her. In the final scene, they returned to the riverside where they first met years ago. Eay handed her the shoes he had saved up for her and, with a promise, told her he would propose to her when he turned 18. In response, Hayami took out Eay's lucky dice and decided to let fate speak. She tossed the dice into the air, and as Eay watched, she leaned in and surprised him with a kiss, answering his proposal with her heart. So, the moral lesson from the story is when life pushes you off a cliff, find a nice guy to carry you back up, but watch out, he might come with his own set of drama. And remember, love means dodging villains and awkward age gaps, but a new pair of shoes and a good head but can solve a lot.